Hello and welcome to Top Story. In the United States, a decision by the Supreme Court has effectively put all executions on indefinite hold. It says it will not authorize putting any more prisoners to death until it has reviewed the legality of execution by lethal injection. The court's decision to prevent the state of Mississippi from executing a prisoner on Tuesday follows similar stays of execution by the justices in the last 3 weeks in Texas and Virginia. The Supreme Court has to decide whether the lethal injection procedures used in all but one of the 37 states that impose the death penalty violate the Eighth Amendment. It states that a prisoner should not experience torture while being executed. Opponents of the practice maintain that the lethal cocktail of drugs used to numb, immobilize and kill inmates can be excruciatingly painful. Instances in which prison technicians have inflicted horrific pain by bungling executions have already persuaded California, Illinois, Florida and other states to suspend executions. Well, joining me now to discuss what this means for the death penalty in the United States is Francis-Perrin, Amnesty International's spokesman in France. Francis, we're not really talking about the end of the death penalty here in the United States, are we? We're talking specifically about an end to the practice of execution by lethal injection.
I would like to be able to tell you that it's an additional nail in the coffin of the death penalty, but we must be cautious, of course, in terms of interpretation. It's a stay of execution, it's not a ruling, and moreover, the majority who decided in favor of this position did not give any reasons for it. So we have to wait for several weeks, for some months, in order to go to the basics of the case, especially in the state of Kentucky. But it's a good news for opponents of the death penalty, and we are part of it since more than 30 years, because as you recalled, it will put on hold many executions in a number of states in the US. And I think a second issue is very important and must be stressed. It's the fact that this method of lethal injection was in fact invented to show that death penalty can be done in a human way.
Yeah, humanely,
and as you know, Amnesty International is saying for more than 30 years that death penalty is inherently cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment. So it's a good case to have this assumption questioned more and more frequently, including at the top of the US legal system.
What has brought this about now, though? Because execution by lethal injection has been a practice that's been used in the United States for some time,
yes.
And the Supreme Court has said nothing about it.
Yes.
Why now?
There is an evolution, I think, first led by appeals and made by lawyers of several people condemned to death penalty. There are more and more of them in the US, and state courts and lower federal courts are struggling with many cases, and we have many decisions, but on one side, on the other, and it's of course time for the Supreme Court to try to give some guidance on this issue. Another problem is, and you spoke about it a few minutes ago, is the fact that in some recent executions in several states, it was really shown on live, if I can use this term, that this type of execution can be really crucial and very painful. And I think that these events, these sad and sinister events, led also to this situation of today.
Independently of the Supreme Court's decision, a number of states have already taken the decision to put on hold execution by lethal injection. Does that suggest that attitudes are changing in the United States to the death penalty, do you think?
I think so. I think we must be cautious once more, and we are cautious at Amnesty, even if we are optimistic about the global trend. But we are convinced that attitudes are changing. It's slow, it's too slow, but it is changing, definitely. We can go back to the decisions, other rulings of the Supreme Court concerning children, concerning people with mental illness, concerning the procedural framework for the death penalty. We can point out the decreasing number of executions in the US for the last decade. and the year 2007 is on the same trend of decreasing number of executions. We, of course, can point also to the number of people who were in fact innocent thanks to DNA identification. So public opinion is certainly much in support of death penalty.
This is the interesting thing,
but the wall
isn't it?
is beginning to crack.
It would be a mistake to suggest that public opinion is against the death penalty in the United States. The evidence suggests that it certainly isn't.
I don't think it's the case today, but what is sure, and it can be measured by opinion polls, is that the importance of the support for death penalty is decreasing in the US, clearly.
And just 42 people executed this year. That's one of the lowest figures for a long time in the United States.
For a little more than a decade, it's significant. And it's not only this year, 2007, it's a decreasing trend over the past decade. So we think it is one of the most important signals in favor of telling that things are changing slowly, but they are changing.
Slowly, indeed. 3,000 people still on death row in the United States. That's a pretty horrific
It's
figure.
the legacy of the past, of course, and it will not be easy for this country to deal with this legacy. But you have this, if I can use this horrible term, you have this stock of people. But the trend can be seen in the annual number of executions, which is decreasing.
You mentioned DNA testing briefly just now. It has proved in many cases that innocent people have been put to death. In the face of that sort of evidence, surely it is very hard to continue justifying the death penalty.
It's clear because death penalty is the only penalty which is totally irreversible. So when you have the conviction and the proof that the US justice system, whatever its sophistication, is not a perfect system, which is of course obvious and which should have been obvious for the US public since a long time, you have increasing doubts for the support of death penalty, except if you are really in favor of closing your eyes in face of this very difficult reality.
Okay, that's all we have time for today. Thanks very much to Francis Perrin of Amnesty International. Join us again for another edition of Top Story next week. Have a good weekend. Goodbye.